massive spoiler warning for Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Future Redeemed, and subsequently just about every other major plot point throughout the entire Xenoblade Chronicles series, with the exception of Xenoblade X and the DLC stories for Xenoblade 1 and 2. If you're a massive Xenoblade Chronicles 2 fan like I am, aside from all the obvious answers we were going to get about Alvis, you likely went into Future Redeemed with one simple question: where are Pyra and Mythra? Well, if you were paying attention unlike I was the first time around, you noticed we got our answer. Just not how you might expect, as it turns out Pyra and Mythra were hiding in plain sight, not only throughout Future Redeemed, but throughout the entire base Xenoblade 3 game. All throughout Future Redeemed, we hear the ultimate Giga Chad Rex and others refer to his former blades and obvious love interest, Pyra and Mythra, without actually naming them. They were usually brought up when talking to or about his daughter Glimmer, since we assume Pyra was her mother. Although she definitely has Mythra's attitude and we know Rex had a kid with her as well, so I'm not really sure anymore. Regardless, at the end of Future Redeemed, when Rex is holding off Alpha, he alludes to Pyra and Mythra for the 15th time by saying, "If only those two were here," which is followed by Mobius N, or Evil Noah, telling Matthew he's going to grant him the power of his sword, which then prompts Matthew's Fists of the End, as N refers to them, to start glowing a bluish-green color. The Aegis's driver himself then turns to Matthew to proclaim, "No way!" Right before it's revealed that Matthew has the core crystal of Pyra and Mythra's final form, Numa, underneath his Ouroboros knuckles or Fist of the End. But then I realized that when Rex said, "If only those two were here," I don't think he was talking about Pyra and Mythra like I initially thought. I think he was talking about Numa and Logos, or Pyra/Mythra and Malos, both from his world of Allrest. The reason I say this is because when Rex and Shulk are about to imbue their kids Glimmer and Nicole respectively with their life force, I guess, Alpha's conscience says, "This is against the rules, you know this." To which Rex responds with, "If it was them, I don't think they'd even bat an eyelid at helping." As he's saying this, Rex turns his head to look at not only the Fist of the End, but the Sword of the End as well, implying that he was referring to Numa, or Pyra and Mythra, in the Fist of the End, and another member of the Trinity processor, which was a key component in making both the world of Allrest and Bionis, in the Sword of the End. The reason I think this is because we know that if the Numa core crystal is in the state that it's in, both Pyra and Mythra have returned to it, which means something significant happened to them that we were never told about, but I'll elaborate more on that later. This leaves one other pretty obvious candidate to be the one whose power resides in the Sword of the End, which Rex not only gestures toward, but also acknowledged. This is important because she also represents a member of the Trinity processor. The only member unaccounted for then would be Logos, whose core crystal just so happens to be purple, just like the lights emanating from End's sheath that houses the Sword of the End, which also has purple on the hilt of the sword. Also, just look at Malos' blade next to End's Sword of the End, and Noah's true Sword of the End. Another thing to note is that in Chapter 7 of Xenoblade 2, Malos straight up calls himself the Endbringer, which sounds a lot to me like the Sword of the End. This sword is said to have been constructed from the metal of origin by Riku's master pawn, who is not Shulk, seeing as Shulk questions him about it in Future Redeemed, unless this is meant to lead us astray, which would be pretty cruel to be honest. I assume maybe Ricky from Xenoblade 1 is his master pawn, but it seems like Ricky might actually be his dad based on the dialogue between him and Matthew in his shop, since it seems like he's talking about two different people when referring to both his master and his dad. So maybe his master pawn is someone we've never met. Regardless, Nia says the sword is a byproduct of Melia's heart and origin, which stores the information of everyone from the world of Allrest and the world of Bionis and Mechonis, which means in theory, the data from anyone in either of those worlds can be linked to that sword. We know Malos, or Logos, presumably died at the end of Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and his crystal was cracked, but it's been cracked before and he still lived and was just able to restore it because he's an Aegis, so his power definitely lives on even if his crystal and the person Malos is gone. So we can assume that just the data of the crystal was taken from Origin in order to make the sword. The question is, why? Well, I think the answer lies in whoever the heck made the sword. It didn't have to be someone evil since Logos, or Malos, was not evil himself, rather his driver was. But the problem is we don't know for sure who it is. The fact that the sword has connections to Melia and the world of Bionis and Mechonis could be an argument against this, but I don't think it negates it completely. All of this leads me to believe that the power of the Ouroboros originally comes from Numa, but the full power of the Ouroboros, such as being able to fully interlink, comes from the combination of Numa and Logos' power, as seen when Matthew uses Numa's power to strike the Sword of the End, which most likely contains the power of Logos, because after this, everybody interlinks together. Because Noah unknowingly holds the power of Numa in his sheath or gauntlet, which he inherited from Matthew, and the power of Logos in the Sword of the End, when exposed to the Ouroboros stone, only he and his party can use the full power of the Ouroboros, like Matthew and his crew. We know that the stones are what was needed to perfect the Ouroboros powers, as told by Riku and the gang in Future Redeemed, and Nia mentions to Noah and the gang in the base Xenoblade Chronicles 3 game that she used her core crystal and origin gears to make the stones. However, I believe she left out the important fact that the pieces of origin she used had the data from Numa's core crystal, so that the stones would have her power to act as an amplifier in a way. The data from both Nia and Numa's core crystal allowed the Ouroboros stones to act like a core crystal in a way, as it can store information like the team in Future Redeemed needed it to when they were trying to enhance the Ouroboros power. It also has to be activated by resonating with particular beings in order for its power to be effective. In other words, just like a core crystal, it doesn't work for everyone. Even though Noah carried Numa's crystal and Logos' imbued Sword of the End, he and his crew had no idea the power even existed, much less how to use it. So I think the job of the Ouroboros stone was to more or less jumpstart that power with the data of combining Logos and Numa's powers, which was obtained from Matthew and in performing the first instance of the full Ouroboros. Much like Logos' crystal itself isn't actually in the Sword of the End, Numa's crystal itself isn't actually in the Ouroboros stone, as Nia mentions that both the Sword of the End and the Ouroboros stones are mere gimmicks. Plus, Numa's actual core crystal resides in Noah's red sheath, or gauntlet, that we know came from Matthew's Ouroboros knuckles, which he got from his grandfather Gondor. Beyond that, I don't think we're told much else about where they came from. So someone likely figured out how to harness the power of Numa's crystal and used it as a weapon. The real question is, how did it get there? And what happened to Pyra and Mithra that made them return to their core crystal? The theory that Rex and Nia's daughter was M, or a version of Mio, made sense until we realized that Rex is still alive at the point when Noah and Mio's son is old enough to have grandchildren, which would make Rex Matthew's great-great-grandfather, even though he looks younger than Gondor, who is an old man at this point. So either this isn't the case, or Rex is looking pretty fine for his age, which, hey, when you're the ultimate Giga Chad, I guess it's possible. If this is the case though, it really wouldn't explain how Matthew's family got their hands on Numa's core crystal, as Rex seems surprised that Matthew has Numa's power. That is, unless Rex just doesn't know Matthew is his descendant, which I find unlikely. Based on this, and on the way Rex keeps referring to Pyra, Mithra, and Malos, it makes me think that Pyra and Mithra were defeated in battle, but not in the way Malos was. I think that since we actually see their core crystal very much intact and working, they simply return to the Numa core crystal. For Rex not to just have reawakened them, they had to have been by themselves and either outmatched or caught by surprise. Who knows, maybe it was Alvis who defeated them after Klaus died because he knew they'd be a threat to his plans later. Surely Rex would have searched day and night to find them, but I'm sure that someone from the Van Damme family found their crystal, possibly Gondor, or less likely, maybe even N himself. Obviously they couldn't resonate with it, so they just tapped into its power. Like any person would do though, Rex eventually had to stop looking for Pyra and Mithra and move on. This might also help to explain why Rex seems so blunt and almost emotionless in Future Redeemed, as opposed to his more optimistic self in Xenoblade 2. He's lost the love of his life and is constantly reminded of them by his daughter Glimmer. For all we know, Pyra and Mithra could have had to return to their core crystal when the two worlds began to collide, as the core crystals in the Trinity processor weren't really ever meant to be awakened into blades in the first place. Another theory I have is that Numa gave half of her life force to Rex like she did in Xenoblade 2, but she gave the other half to Shulk to save or free them from the cycle in Xenoblade 3, rendering her crystal essentially lifeless. Though, like I said, Aegis's powers never really die, which means Rex and Shulk would therefore be passing that life force on to Glimmer, Numa's daughter, and Nicole, which according to Rex is something that she would have done anyway. This could explain how Rex was surprised Matthew was able to use the crystal instead of him being surprised at the fact that he had it in the first place. The only issue I see with this theory is, why would Rex have given up Numa's core crystal to anyone else? Of course, he could have given it up for safekeeping, and what better candidate than the family of his lost mentor Van Damme to give it to. Either way, as much as I hate to admit it, Rex's swords are probably replicas. Something to note is that the series director of Xenoblade Chronicles, Tetsuya Takahashi, stated that Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Future Redeemed will be the end of what fans refer to as the Klaus Saga. Because we see the two worlds reform successfully as one at the end of Future Redeemed, we assume the influence of Klaus, which was him unintentionally separating the two worlds, is no longer. The Trinity processor was a crucial element in creating these two worlds, and while it could still exist going going forward, it's not a stretch to think that it and everything related to it, Numa, Logos, and Ontos, are now gone, meaning we could see the future of this newly merged world going forward without the Trinity processor. And that's the canon reason for Pyra and Mithra not physically appearing in Xenoblade Chronicles 3. And the real reason they weren't actually shown the theories I mentioned throughout this video are me simply sharing my thoughts on Future Redeemed, so let me know in the comments if I missed anything or if you just disagree, and thanks for watching till the end.